Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first LiDNUG Round the Table Open Discussion. The three of us today, the three geeks, we have Peter Shaw, we have Brian Madsen and Will Kelly. Peter Shaw, probably has been of the oldest among us, has many decades of stories, grim frontline battles in the technology arena. Brian Madsen, who since I've known him has probably travelled more around the world than anybody I've ever known, so I consider him to be the travelling problem solver, serious C-sharp geek, and just all-round general nerd. And also we have Will Kelly sat at the back there, who I would consider to be the top geek hunter, rounding us up, keeping us straight, and putting us in front of potential people to throw money at us. Ladies and gentlemen, I hand you over to the gentlemen for tonight. Remember, gentlemen, keep the fight clean. If fists start flying, I'm not getting involved. I'm just going to open the popcorn and watch. Over to you guys.
Do you want to kick off, Brian?
Yeah, sure. My name is, as Gavin said, my name is Brian Madsen. I am one of the older group managers at LiDNUG. Been with it for, I don't know, 12 years, 13 years now. I'm a consultant, IT consultant, and I live in Sweden now. Previously, I lived in Australia, and then before that in Denmark.
My name's Peter Shaw, Shawty, most of you know me as. As Gavin said, far too many decades doing this rubbish. 40 years to be exact since I first laid my fingers on a keyboard. What have I not touched? What have I not broken? Lists too long, time's too short. Will, you're up.
My name is Will Kelly. I do not write code, so I'm the odd man out. But for the past 15 years, I've built development teams on pretty much every stack of technology. I've run offices. I've started my own company. Currently, I work for a pretty top-notch software engineering consulting company called Headstorm as their engineering community manager. So I am here to give you the recruiter side of it all and help on that side if I could.
And if you've got any questions at all, just pop them into the chat box at the side of the YouTube window. Should be to the right if my orientation is correct. And Gavin, who's sat watching that, will let us know. If you're on LinkedIn and you're talking via the actual LiDNUG group itself, then find Dan Weigand, put your questions to him, and he'll pass them along from there. Brian, do you want to give an overview of what we're going to have a bit of a gossip about tonight?
Yeah, we can do a quick overview. We're going to talk a little bit about the industry in general. We're going to talk about developers, how to get into the industry, the different perceptions there are for roles in industry, and some of the important aspects of IT and T, especially in the developer space these days. And then we get time for it. We're going to talk a bit about some old war stories, a few things that we've experienced around the globe, and what we worked with. It should be fun.
Great stuff. So I'm looking down your list here, your list of topics. For some reason, I gyrated to your notes before I gyrated to mine because yours are just damned easy to read, mate. And up the top here, I think you've posed probably the one question or the two main questions I think that are probably going to get asked of anybody listening to this or wanting some advice from people who've done this job. And that's the difference between in-house, freelance and consultant, and what are the actual roles and responsibilities that junior, senior, lead and architect, and possibly team or corporate expectations of the three of them. Now, I think before we get into the developer manager's definition of those, I'd like to hear the recruiter's definition of those first.
Well, really, when you look at the different areas that you can play at, if you look at contractors, if you look at consultant, if you look at in-house, and I don't want to call it outhouse, even though some of it can be in an outhouse. It's really different ball games. Number one, if you would want to go the Shawty route, if you want to be the hired gun independent contractor, one of the things that I would really, probably first warn you about is that Peter is his own boss, but he's also his own salesperson. It's constant business development. It's constant churn, getting from one contract to the next. It's not an easy road just by its own design. Really not having a giant company to support you. If you look at the path that a Brian took, which is like, when I look at Brian and I look at Peter, it's like these two excellent guys that are, probably first warn you about as technologists go, as far as their knowledge, but they're in such different areas. Brian working at a giant consulting company, there's so much there to navigate. Look at the path the things that maybe Peter might not have to worry about, Brian's going to have to worry about tenfold, just dealing with such a ginormous organization. So it's two different lives, and it's really kind of different ways to chase that path if you want it from a candidate standpoint.
I think you hit on quite a good point there. I think for the freelance particularly, I know myself, it's not just being a developer and a marketer, but I actually have to be the businessman as well. Don't get me wrong, I've not done freelance forever. There was a time when I have worked full-time positions. So I have sat there on the team. I have sat there as part of a larger organization, and I have had the backing of the organization behind me. And I know certainly back then, I really didn't appreciate and understand a lot of the reasons why the business gave me the grief that it did, that I understand now. And particularly recently, because as of the beginning of this year, I've taken on my first contractor myself. I've always worked solo, but I now actually have a paid contractor on my books. And just having to keep an eye on timelines, having to keep an eye on deadlines, having my client say to me, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? And me having to go to my contractor and saying, well, why haven't you done it yet?
I think that the freelance, as I see them, that there's two types. That there is the truly independent, like what Peter is doing here, where they do everything from both handling the books, handling taxes, handling pre-sales, ensuring that contracts and performance is there. And then there is the freelance that let's see, gravitate between brokers and contract offerings. They may use services to handle their invoicing and their time sheeting and timekeeping. And for those on a freelance scenario, they have a life a little bit easier in that their sales is generally their CV and word of mouth. Whereas with Peter, for instance, he has to first and foremost continually work on let's say business development, continually have to look
Absolutely.
for not just next month or the month after, but especially now that you also have another consultant working with you. We're talking 6 months ahead. What happens after this contract? What if this contract goes over? Sure. What is the risk of starting a new one? These kind of differences in the freelance game, I think there is two particular there. And we see it especially over here in Sweden now. We see the freelance independent, they start up a company name and they subcontract. And they do that through brokers throughout the industries. And once they're among a broker, they get sold into projects and customers just as if they were an employee. So they have the, let's say, I would say that they picked the long straw in the bunch in the freelance market.
Well, just to give you an example of what you're on about, my forecast for at any point in my day-to-day working of my business is always 2 years in front. I am always looking 2 years minimum in front of what I'm doing. I think Gavin's got a question there.
Yeah.
Gav?
Yeah, we just have a question from the audience there from Masit. He's asking, what are the challenges you face in Europe that we don't in the US?
Where do you want me to start?
Brexit. Sorry, couldn't help it. I think the market in Europe is a lot more narrow than it is in the US. US is fundamentally different than Europe is in terms of both IT adoption and how IT is presented, especially in consultancies and also in developer roles, in-house roles, for instance. In Europe, I can speak particularly from the Scandinavian side of things, where the safety nets are phenomenal up here, which means that you can be more risky. You can risk going to a new job or new contract fairly easy because you have massive safety nets under you.
Yeah.
But in terms of challenges that are direct, I think the market, there's a larger lack of skilled IT people, especially developers, in Europe than there is in the US. And it's pure numbers game, simply as that. I mean, especially you go as north as I am, where attracting European talent is really, really hard. You sort of have to rely on your local talent more so than ever. Even though the EC has, free trade and so on, there is still bureaucratic type scenarios where you can't just move from one country to the other and start working. You still need to have a work visa. You still need to make sure you have a place to live and stay and so on. And those are considerations, I think, that are big in differences between the two markets.
Well, this was largely one of the problems with the EU and Brexit. Just to point out what you mentioned when the question first opened. Certainly, I'm not going to give a whole history lesson here, but when the EU first started and everybody joined the European Economic Union, it was done for the benefit of trade. It was actually done for the benefit of the farmers moving their produce around Europe. But over the years, it's become twisted and contorted into something highly political, which I don't, and a lot of others don't think it should ever have done. And that's what's caused a lot of the problems. And the free market has become so mired up in red tape and bureaucracy. One of the reasons why the UK wanted to leave was because it had just had enough of all this bureaucracy, and new countries joining the EU particularly have such a list of rules and regulations and working practices and things that, even solo employees have to deal with, That said, the UK itself, as an independent country, is not that much easier. Our tax system is horrendous. If you have any kind of business in the UK, you absolutely need an accountant. It's not that the tax system is complex per se, not IRS complex. I'm sure Will can give us some more on that.
I'd rather not
in a minute. But it's not IRS complex, if that makes sense, Will. But it's complicated in there are so many variations on the rule. It's like if you've got more than so many employees, go this way. If you've got less employees, go that way. On this branch, if you make that much money, go up. If you make that much money, go down. If you go, do you know what I mean? And there's just so many twists and turns. If you can't navigate, if you don't have somebody who knows how to navigate the maze, you will fall foul. And when you do fall foul, it's not nice. They don't sort of send you a pleasant letter saying, look, you screwed up, do you want to fix it? The next thing you get somebody braying on the door saying, there's a red letter, pay it now or else bad things are going to happen. You know what I mean? And a lot of the time, people, small business owners, particularly independents and freelancers, end up with these letters and they don't even know why they've got them. And then you try to phone the tax authorities and say, well, why have I got this? And it's just like, well, because you were bad, you didn't pay your taxes on time. I was like, well, that doesn't help me. You know, well, pay them on time next time and you wouldn't be in this mess. You know?
There's also, aside from things like tax and the business side of things, I think for developers in particular, I mean, look at just nationalities, language is very diverse here in Europe, whereas
it is absolutely
as much in the US. I mean, you speak English in the US, you speak English. Yes, you can have an accent, like we can hear from Will, for instance, but here, if I drive 3 hours, there's a different language from where I live now. I drive 6 hours, there's another language. I mean, and many countries, they require you, especially in public contracts, they require you to speak the language. You have to speak the local language. You don't, if you don't speak the local lingo, you are cutting away minimum 50% of your job opportunities straight down the path. And it is anything from big corporates. Of course, some of them are more geared towards English speaking because they have multinational type coordination and so on. But in the majority of things, for instance, here in Sweden, if you don't speak Swedish, 50% minimum of your opportunities are already away, and that's just on that level.
Interesting question I've got for Will. Do you? I mean, you deal with hiring of staff internationally, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of things hit you? What kind of problems do you get when you try to hire staff from this side of the Atlantic?
Really, it's just, I mean, kind of like what Brian was talking about. Every single place literally is its own country, I mean, and it's just like, the rules and the regulations for, I mean, let alone, trying to find a W-2 employee, just engaging someone on a contractual basis, it gets to the point where even though you might have some great resources over there to capitalize on, it doesn't even make sense from like a back office standpoint. You know what I mean? As far as really going, I mean, we hire a lot of, non-US folks that are already here. I mean, we're talking to people from Australia and the UK right now that are in our area. But especially as things get more remote based, and I think COVID has really, talked a lot of people and that's being the permanent norm, and that's by design. And that should be, because if it's going to let more people do this job, that would be great. We're certainly going to need more of a centralized process globally that we can onboard contractors with, and it would just really help. I mean, I'm not even technical like y'all are, but just how much work it takes to even start the damn project, makes people not even want to do projects at all.
Well, I know, I mean, myself and others, and you may actually have seen the news as well, that YouTube video creators suddenly have to start filling in IRS paperwork. But for the past 10 years now, every 2 years, I have to fill in a WBEN 10 or WBEN 20, something like that, for the IRS, And to say this form is invasive is an understatement.
Sure.
And I'm not even an American citizen. And this is just so that I can work contracts for people in the US.
Yeah.
YouTube are now saying that any YouTubers will now in future have to pay 24% of their YouTube income to the IRS, the tax authorities, for the number of American viewers that watch their videos. Sure. But YouTube are not willing to release the figures of how many viewers are American and how many weren't.
Yeah.
Because the IRS have told them.
I'm not here to get political, but our country doesn't have the right people paying for a lot of this stuff. I mean, my tax bracket has someone that you know, compared to a lot of people, like I'm blessed, but I'm no Bill Gates. You know,
I don't think any of us are.
I don't think YouTubers should be paying our debt. I think we can go up the ladder on that a bit.
Fair enough. I think Gavin has another question there.
Well, two things from this it. Firstly, he says, sorry, our tax system is worse than yours. And secondly, is coding only done in English?
Now, you know, that's a very interesting question, because this is actually one that pops up on Quora very, very, very often. You know, I see so many questions asking exactly that. Can I write code in English? Can I write code in Chinese? Can I write code in Russian? And the answer to it is kinda. Syntax is syntax. You know, var is var, printf is printf, console.writeline, console.log. You know, you can't exactly misspell them, because if you try to spell them using a different language, then the compiler's just going to throw the bathwater out. But there's nothing stopping you from putting your comments in a different language or your variable names. I mean, I've certainly read code from some of the Eastern Bloc countries, and I've not been able to understand the variable names, and I've not been able to understand the comments, but I can understand the structure of the code. Now, in comparison, I've read Chinese code on GitHub and what have you, and you just can't make head and tail of that. Even though it is only the comments and the variable names and the function names and things that are done in Chinese, because the language is so in your face, it's very difficult to separate it all out and make sense of it. You know?
What I've seen up here, I mean, was it Acid that asked? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we see a big mix of it. We really do. Where the code in itself and the database and the column names and entities and methods and objects are written Swedish named. More and more often we see them change from that as they go along. So of course it depends on what type of system it is to be English. And the reason is they realize that there is a shrinking pool of talent available for something so simple as just reading the code if you keep it in Swedish. But if it's a large legacy system, there's a high probability that majority of the code will be, for instance, here in Swedish. And that can be an issue. The biggest problem is not necessarily the code, though. So you can read it, you can read the structure, you can follow the red thread through the code. The biggest problem is just understanding the business requirements, understanding the tasks you have to do. And if you're working with high-end systems that are fairly complex, making small mistakes because you can't read or you misunderstand a requirement is fairly dangerous and it's costly.
It is, absolutely. One of the other problems I do find, however, with code that is written using non-English variable names and comments is, again, this comes back to the multiple languages thing, but the different fonts, the umlauts and things like that, particularly German, when you see code written in German. And some of those weird characters, particularly the Unicode ones, can send the compiler a bit daft sometimes.
Dates are the worst one I've seen. Swedish, for instance, have a different date format than many others have, and it still today, it still spins me out today, unless it's specifically saying 15th of March 2021. If it's written in let's say numerical only, it takes me a little time to convert it around, and that can be quite interesting from a locality perspective. One of the things also I think we could talk a little about is roles and responsibilities, and this is I think probably something where Will is more of an expert than us in terms of what he sees from the market and what he sees from those that are presenting them for different roles. The typical career progression people are seeing today is junior, senior, lead, and then architect, or they may jump one or two if they are under small teams or exceptionally talented. But Will, what do you see, for instance, if you look at juniors today, what do you think that the primary responsibility of a junior in as a developer? It doesn't matter if it's a consultant or freelance or in-house engineer.
Well, you know what? A lot has changed. Like, I remember when I first started in this business that, if you were a developer, you just had to have some rock solid object-oriented skills in one or two of the big chief languages, and then you were off to the races. You were going to learn some SQL and have a day. Congratulations. One of the things right now about just the modern development ecosystem that is both cool from a simple standpoint and maddening because there's so many flavors is it's really simple. No matter where you go, and this is what I tell my candidates, no matter what job you take, Brian, or what project Peter takes on, in 2021, you're going to run into a JavaScript front end. It might just be JavaScript. It might be jQuery. It might be a SPA framework like React or Angular or Vue or Gatsby or Svelte. I could talk for 2 days on SPA frameworks. Everywhere you go, the business rules are going to be composed of some sort of OO language. In our world, it's C# or Java. You're both building and consuming a REST API. You've got SQL, NoSQL, and the cloud in the back. So the worst word that I think that's happened in our industry recently is just that word full stack. Full stack. You know what I mean? Because all of a sudden, like, I've worked at a sandwich shop most of my life. I've now taken my Code Academy class and I'm a full stack developer. HR says I need full stack, marketing says full stack, and it can be confusing, and honestly, as a 15-year recruiter, it's full stack is kind of a myth. There's more of a T, okay? And we've talked about this in previous LiDNUG Q&As. You're going to have your deep dive where your bread and butter and your heart is. It might be a very compelling user interface. It might be a back end, and yes, you're going to learn the other tiers as far as like being serviceable, but you're going to be known what you're known for, So to answer your question, Brian, I would say that understanding that these are what the different tiers look like, go out there and marry one, JavaScript is a great entry point. There are a lot of different places where you can learn the MERN stack and come out a competent JS engineer. But then you've got to learn your data structures and you've got to learn your OO stuff, or if you take the CS route, you're going to come out with some C++ and some Java, and you can get that first business job, but you're going to have to learn the front end, and you're going to have to learn SPA frameworks. So it's like the Code Academies are good for the very, very new, and the CS degree and the classic path is kind of good for like best practices, and then it meets in the middle for like, I have best practices, but I also have relevancy on modern stacks, so there's no excuses for junior devs anymore because you've got code repositories. It's all shareable now. And I can tell you what, I work at a premier consulting company and we're doing PR requests and we're looking at y'all's code to make hiring decisions. You can damn well believe that, and if we've got to work on your client experience and if we've got to brush up on one area, can you write some good, reliable code in a team setting? That's really all I care about to get your foot in the door. And our door is not easy.
I think you've kind of summed up exactly what my feeling has been for a long time now on those roles and responsibilities. And my whole take on it is I actually don't care. I don't care for junior, senior, lead, architect, or anything like that. My whole opinion of those titles has for a long time been they are things that HR gives to us so they can label an amount that they pay us, or so they can label a skill level or a metric in a graph somewhere. Yeah. But to me, and I'm sure Brian will agree with me on this, a developer is a developer is a developer. What makes one developer different to another is skill and experience. It really is that simple. One point I'm fond of putting on some of my Quora answers is quite simply this. I have 40 years worth of experience. I know one of my specialities is GSM networking and mobile communications and writing software for that system. Yeah. And then he's the guy sat next to me who's fresh out of college with a hefty degree in machine learning and artificial intelligence. So answer me this question. Who's the better developer out of the two of us? Me with all my experience and my knowledge, or this guy with his experience in machine learning? Well, the actual answer is that neither of us are better than each other, because I know jack shit about machine learning and artificial intelligence. I've never bothered to study it. It's not, if I have to, I will, but it's not something that I've had to study. So in this respect, this junior, if you want to label him that, sat next to me, does in actual fact know more than I do on that subject. So that makes him the better of the two of us. But then when you flip it back and you look at my experience and my GSM stuff, I clearly know stuff that he doesn't. Yeah. So well, I think it puts us on an equal footing.
Here's a huge problem right now, and the problem isn't something that you alluded to, Peter. Skill and experience might have something to do with one or the other, but sometimes it doesn't. Okay, skill. You need to pursue skill. Okay, and if I was going to say, hey, one of you guys, you're going to go to war. Okay, and you're going to take this CrossFit champion with ripped abs that can, bench press 3 times their weight, and they know every fighting technique, but they've never been to that area of the country. They've never fought over there. They don't know the dialect. Or you could go with Will, who has a beer gut and can't run 2 miles, and he's on his 7th tour of war. The experience of just the positivity and the failings of, hey, this is what you do in this situation. I've been doing this for 40 years. I know. That stuff it's invaluable. And a lot of that is discounted because HR and everybody's like, skill. In these specific things, I need skill. And a lot of the time, I don't want a developer that hasn't been there, done that hasn't shipped code for good and bad.
This, interesting enough, yes, I do agree that titles and so on are in the large aspect, especially when you do something contextual, like if you're doing a machine learning project and somebody has 40 years and another one has, the CS degree with specific skills in that area. The way I see it is that the juniors or talents responsibility is to listen and learn. That's how I see it. They're not coming on board because they're aces. They're not expected to be aces. They're not expected to go in and be miracle workers. They're going to save the projects. They're there, and you take them on because it's a future investment.
Yeah.
The senior's responsibility is to ensure that the junior doesn't make the mistakes that the senior probably has done many times. That is where the senior, I think, shines. If they are engaged seniors and they are working together with the juniors, the learning curve for the junior would skyrocket because they will avoid making the mistakes that they otherwise would have potentially done. And that's the role of the senior, as I see, simply as that. The senior is not the one that types the fastest and knows the most languages or anything else. The senior, as I see, is the one that ensures that the team moves forward and not in the 2 forwards and then 1 back, 2 forward and 1 back, because they are engaged with the project. They're engaged with their team members. And I think this is where the differentiator in those titles come out, other than HR's price matrix and so on.
Well, if I can quote from one of my Quora questions here, the question that was actually asked is, what do you think of a senior software developer on the team who can't write code? Now, I kind of get what they were asking, because I know a little bit of background of the question asker. But my reply to this goes something like this. You do realize what the role of most seniors is on a project, right? I'm guessing not, so let me enlighten you. And I broke it down into 3 sections. The businessman's view: a senior developer team leader is a programmer that can do everything, right, in any language, solve all of our problems at the drop of the hat, make world peace, all while having a cup of tea.
Mm-hmm.
A junior middle developer's view of the senior developer: A senior developer is somebody who gets to sit there and pick and choose the programming tasks they want to work on, and generally doesn't have to do much because management worship him or her. But then I go on to say, the senior on a team actually spends most of their time doing the following: reading through the code that the rest of the team has written to make sure it matches the specifications, mentoring and helping the junior and mid-level staff and coaching them through the benefit of his own knowledge, organising reports and updates on project status for project managers, reading up on new technologies to see whether they're a good fit for the project, taking business specifications and turning them into tasks that other developers can read and understand, gathering work performance metrics to make sure the team's on target and budget, dealing with and explaining, and this is probably one of the most important ones, dealing with and explaining why the business can't implement every single crazy idea they might dream up. Gathering the feedback from the testing teams, DBAs, and the operations folks to make sure the testing and developing on appropriate setups for the project being run, making sure continuous build systems and version repositories are up to date, backed up, making sure the other devs have all the tools and the software they need and that it all works. And if they have a few minutes to spare, writing a little bit of code here and there while they sit down and have that well-earned cup of tea.
Mm-hmm.
I think that pretty much sums it up, to be fair.
It does. It does, and it should. I think Kevin has another question.
We actually have a couple of questions if we want to take a few minutes just to go through these.
Yeah.
The first one is from Dan. What's the future of WebAssembly compared with other older technologies, including WPF and Xamarin?
Okay. What's the other one?
The other two questions we have, firstly, is aimed at Brian. Do you see contracts coming from America? And also, what is your take on Google offering certification that will compete with university degrees?
So should we do the two work job related ones first, then do the WebAssembly one later?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'll hand that one over to you, Brian.
Okay. What was it? Contracts from here. I'm assuming he means from the US.
Yes, from the US.
In general, no, we don't. We do work with international companies, and that's quite common. I mean, it has not been that long ago that where I happen to live, which is in Stockholm, was sort of the Silicon Valley of Europe. So there is a massive amount of seed money floating in up here. There's a massive amount of projects out here for companies that are international, both in their infancy stage, but also as they move on and as they progress. So yeah, we do see contracts from the US, but mostly they're done through corporates that are located in Europe. And I reckon it's probably because it's easier, both from legality perspective, to deal directly within the EEC. Also, we talked about before, tax purposes, et cetera, but it does happen, yeah. And there was another one that was it Google offering certifications? Yeah, I mean, is it really any different than what Microsoft had done on their certification?
I was just going to ask the same question.
I think that Amazon is doing it. I mean, if there is a university degree that you can get that gives you the same skills from Google as you would attain from a normal educational institution, so I don't see why it wouldn't be valid. I mean, I see it as skills acquired, irrespective of where it's from. Is skills acquired.
I have I have a slightly different take on this. I don't know whether you'll agree with me or not. It's slightly controversial, but I think okay. Let's just push that question back a little bit and look at where we are at the moment. We have lots of a healthy developer ecosystem. We have lots of people interested in the subject. We have lots of people jumping on the bandwagon at the moment. And all of these new developers coming in are tomorrow's users. So let's take Azure. Okay, let's take Azure and Microsoft just as an example, right? It's in Microsoft's best interests to get all of these developers onto Azure these days. This is why they don't pursue people for piracy on the operating systems anymore. This is why you can get everything for nothing, because all those developers, when they come out of university and college, they are tomorrow's Office 365 users. Do you follow my thinking?
Mm-hmm.
And it's much the same with Azure, with Amazon and AWS. All those developers are tomorrow's Amazon marketplaces users. Google, tomorrow's Google subsystem users, Google Documents users, Google Mail users. Yeah, and I think what they're kind of hoping is if they train them themselves and get them hooked into this ecosystem, they'll suck them in so deeply that that'll be the only stack that they want to work with. So when they come of age, so to speak, they'll be the only systems they want to work with. The Google people will go off and they'll only ever write applications for the Google Play Store. The Apple folks will go off and only write applications for the Apple Play Store. And then they can close that wall in even further, you know? So Apple control everything Apple. Do you see where I'm coming from on this?
I do to an extent, but I think the market demands dictates opportunity far more than just what you have learned. I mean, my oldest daughter is right now learning an obscure old language in her first programming classes, and it is irrelevant today. It hasn't. I mean, the language platform hasn't been updated, I think, in 12 years.
Yeah, and that's why we have code academies, Brian. That's literally why they came out, is because of this. Because the classic path has not caught up.
No.
And that's why kids are now going, in 6 months, I know React, I'm ready for life, you know? So,
Exactly.
I mean, and it's tough, you know? I mean, I have a hard job because we hire technically agnostic, platform agnostic, fundamental technologists that don't give a shite what JavaScript framework or backend is there, you know, because they're pursuing, you know, how to program and how to be really good at that, you know. So, you know, I don't really have an answer to this question. If Google wants to go out there and improve people's competency so guys like me can find them quicker, that's fine, you know. And I get what Peter's saying too. I mean, you know, they're going to come out knowing Angular, you know, that's for sure, you know, because that's their stuff, you know. So
the thing though, the other thing that concerns me about this, okay, I do get it. I mean, yes, a technology company knows technology, otherwise they wouldn't be in the business. So they kind of are, in a way, the ones that should be teaching. But I've also trained as a teacher, like classic teaching, not a technology teacher. And I've got certifications in teaching, and I know from doing that there is more to giving a good education than just mind cramming a technical subject into a student. Do you know what I mean? I'm obviously I'm not going to bore you with all the ins and outs of it, but if you ever want to look into this, Bloom's taxonomy and the 3 learning domains are probably where you should be starting. You know, software development is very, very, very cognitive. Yeah, but there is a huge percentage of people coming into this business that are not cognitive enough. They're not thinkers. They're the type of people that should be out on the football field running around doing athletics and sports, but they get wowed by the marketing and the fact that it's Google doing the marketing and Amazon doing the marketing, telling them that they will train them and that they will guarantee them a 6-figure job, and they just get sucked right into it. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of these people that get sucked in by this marketing of Google saying we're going to train you really shouldn't be programming at all, because they just don't have the right mentality for it.
Yeah, I mean that's aptitude in itself. But One thing that I just want to quickly touch on here before we go to Dan's question, it is, Will, what you mentioned before is that you hire high-end technology agnostic consultants. And being a consultant myself, I recognize that because it's probably one of the strengths that a consultant have is that they are not married into this. That's
Exactly.
where the value of a consultant is. That they tend to be problem solvers. They tend to be people that can have many hats on depending on what day it is in the week and when the sun shines out, because they're not married and not invested so solely into one ecosystem or one platform or one product. They know that they're there to ease risk for a business in implementing a technical solution.
It is very
That is
much the
pretty
same
much
for freelancers as well, to be fair.
very much so, definitely, especially in when the freelance becomes, I'll say, vastly more experienced. Yes, there is a huge value in both freelance and consultants as well that are specific Episerver, AWS, Azure, or what have we of platform specialists, and that have been working in different industry silos or settings for a long time, such as finance or security and so on. I'm not going to discount any of this here, but consultants in particular are very much often agnostic, and that's and they have to be, because the value in their especially when they go on to a customer side, their value in particular is to be able to solve the problem with any tool they have available in their toolbox, much like a freelance has to do as well.
Well, I mean, I go in to do jobs, and I'm expected not only to do the software, I'm expected to start at the beginning and go, right, that's broken, it needs fixing, that's how it needs fixing, or we need to build a new machine, and then now the machine's running, it needs to have this, and then once it's got that, it needs to, and I'm expected to go from the bottom all the way to the top of the ladder.
Yeah, exactly, because you're there to fix a problem, not to decide what to write it in or what to implement, but to fix a problem.
Yeah. And the thing too, like if I was to hire you, Brian, or you, Peter, or you guys both as a team and give you, a problem that needed solving, I know that the recommendation is going to be what the right tool is for the job, and not just what you know, and not just your comfort level, and if your life is just .NET and that's all you know, if your life's just Java ecosystem, or if you're just a JS person, that's one of the things too. It's like, well, I'm going to give you a recommendation because I can give you a stronger solution in this one personally. When really at the end of the day, I mean, it's pretty common. We've got one customer in the ag tech space that we did a POC on 3 different platforms. It was like a .NET Azure, a Java Spring Boot AWS, and then a purely functional. And they were like, wow, I like the diversity that y'all showed us, and that's really important if you want to get to the level that you and Peter are at.
And I think the let's say the final area here to talk on, I think, with regards to for consultants at least, and of course I have a little bit of bias being a consultant myself, it is that you're right. The solution is not going to be something that I'm personally invested in. If I am, I'm skewing, I should say, not screwing, but skewing the solution in my favor rather than the businesses.
For sure.
And then that's a bad consultant, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's one that won't get more work from that client.
Exactly. It's a one-off, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that comes into, I mean, as a consultant, the top tier to achieve is as a trusted advisor.
Yep.
Being able you don't have to justify yourself all the time. You don't have to combat internal or external forces whenever you give a recommendation. It's trusted because the business knows you're giving them a recommendation that is based on their needs, not yours.
Yep. Well, perfect example. I mean, I can't stand Java. As a language, it sucks. I hate it. Yeah, and I will stay as far away from it as I humanly can. But if I look at a problem and that problem is best addressed with a Java solution, well, guess what? Yeah. I'm going to use Java to do it. Because that is just the right thing to do.
Toolbox.
Exactly. I frequently tell developers that it's not the language that you learn. Oh, but I want to be a coder. Yeah, be a coder. You can learn to code in 6 months. That's easy. What you can't learn to do in 6 months is how to take that code and apply it to solving a problem, because you don't have enough experience with other languages and other code and other systems, you know. The other one is the WordPress angle. You know, somebody comes to me and asks me for a simple website that they can edit themselves. I'm not going to sit down and develop it in .NET.
No, why would you? That'd be silly.
I'm going to sit. I'm going to spend half a day, chuck it together on a simple PHP server using WordPress. Go, there you go. That's 350 quid, please.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, I agree. All right. So Dan had a question about
WebAssembly.
If it has a if it had a future, I think it was, or what the future is. So one of the things with WebAssembly is that it's like any other technology that comes out. It has a bit of a hype. I mean, look at Silverlight, look at WPF, and so on, that had hypes and has sort of fizzled a bit. I mean, Silverlight in particular in this case. Yeah, I'm not just naming those because of, you know, they are gone nearly, but. I think the WebAssembly's more and more academic papers are getting written now with the basis of it. More and more technology openings on new cutting edge areas, such as blockchain, is coming out, making WebAssembly. So there is this, I think it's called WAVM. So it's the virtual machine WebAssembly, and how it actually functions and works together for blockchain. That is now starting to see the light. So I think technologies like WebAssembly is going to grow, and it is, but it depends on adoption. It really does. And there's, of course, opposing forces in it. There is the established languages, platforms, and so on that are a little bit resistant to adopting some of it, or even to go down on it. And then there is platform support as well. If you need to buy bespoke hardware, you can't just click on a button and have a VM running and voila, off you go. That's also going to be a decision point. So I think when both the path and the knowledge around WebAssembly gets, let's say, move forward, becomes more prevalent, I think it will be a technology that's going to definitely accelerate. Definitely.
So the main problem I'm seeing with WebAssembly at the moment is actually the nomenclature of it, the naming of it. Now, what do I mean by that? So a lot of people are looking at WebAssembly and they're saying, right, I've got to learn WebAssembly. And what they're not realizing is that WebAssembly is actually a target language. If you look at the W3C recommendations, if you look at the white papers, if you look at the specifications, WebAssembly is not designed as a language for humans to use. It's designed as a target language. The whole intention is that it becomes the result of the compilation of another language. And this is getting glossed over by a lot of them in favor of marketing, particularly Blazor. You know, I mean, if you look at Blazor at the moment, Blazor this, Blazor that, Blazor the other, and everybody's like, well, Blazor, it's just going to be another Microsoft thing. It's going to work the same way as Silverlight. And it's actually not, because Blazor is not WebAssembly. Blazor is Microsoft's Web UI framework. It just happens to be built on top of WebAssembly. Or more's the point, WebAssembly is one of its targets. It actually has other targets as well, you know, but WebAssembly is one of its targets. So even if Microsoft decided to throw Blazor out with the bathwater next week, WebAssembly is still going to continue, you know. Right now, and I can attest that this is actually possible because I've done it myself. Right now, it is possible to take a C++ compiler in the form of mscripting with SDL, Simple Direct Media Layer, already built in. Now, SDL, for those who don't know, is a media and games graphics library that implements all of the original MS-DOS stuff. And it is possible to take old C++ MS-DOS games and just compile them straight off using M scripting, and then drop them straight into a browser and run them. You know, all these old 486 games like Doom and all that's exactly how they've been done. And the idea behind it, I think, is very, very strong. You know, what they've essentially done is they've took WebAssembly and they've done with WebAssembly what we did with assembler language on the CPU. Only this time, it's the browser that's the CPU, kind of. You know, it's not a CPU, but you know what I mean. The browser is the CPU in this case. And I think it's going to get better and better and better. Now, we are still in version 1 at the moment. Version 2 is going to come out. It'll have threads in, and it'll be able to work with web workers, things like that. And certainly it's gaining a lot of attention. Google already have a compiler with it for Go. M scripting, as I mentioned. There is a compiler for Rust. Heck, there's even a PHP compiler now. And the .NET stuff, even though it runs Blazor, anything that targets .NET can also target the WebAssembly runtime. So that actually means that you can go and take languages that don't actually have a .NET sorry, let me rephrase that. You can take a language that doesn't have its own target, say, for example, PHP or IronPython, and because they can be compiled to .NET, PHP with the PyPy compiler, IronPython with the .NET IronPython compiler, and you can use them on WebAssembly as well. You know? So, yeah, it's going to be around for a long time. I mean, WebAssembly, as for WebAssembly, it's here to stay. You know? JavaScript's about to get some serious competition, I think.
How many times have we heard that? Oh my God.
The next JavaScript killer.
Yeah, I'm not gonna poo-poo on any of that you just said. I'm just saying like I'm all over job descriptions. I'm all over job boards like all day. I see a little more demand for JavaScript than WebAssembly. Like I haven't even heard of WebAssembly yet. Now I know that it's new, and I am all for any soft stuff that is going to make better front ends, especially if it marries into other open source stuff. But that's just like, you know, every year another iPad killer comes out.
Well, I think we're going to have to teach you some stuff, Will.
Good. Teach me something so I could do a Headstorm University on it for my company. They would love to get it. I've got some crazy .NET heads there.
Nice.
So,
Gavin Gavin, did you have more questions? I thought your hand was up before, but it disappeared again.
No, it was just it wasn't a question. It was just a message for Will from Steve in chat there. He just wants to say, glad to hear there are recruiters doing that level of investigation and to help candidates. That habit needs to be applauded because it helps everyone win at the end of the day.
I appreciate that.
Oh, definitely.
My job is never done, and it's just giving engineers a fair shot and blazing a trail for them. If I could code, I wouldn't be talking to you guys, so I help wherever I could.
Do yourself. To go away from that a little bit, what about career paths today? So we saw traditionally, you know, I mentioned before, junior, senior, lead, and architect. Is this the career path that you guys are seeing? Are you seeing this career path still with people that they start in the industry and then their next goal is senior and then lead and then architect? Is those traditional aims or goals, are they still the ones people are looking at today?
From my perspective, it definitely is. Like, you know, I think the holy grail, and it's well deserved, you know, for any developer is to be an architect. It's just like building anything. You know, eventually, if you get to the point where you're getting paid for your own designs, I think that's pretty amazing. You know, but I'm also seeing, Brian, and this is something that I was even talking to like my own company's leadership about. There's nothing wrong with plateauing at a senior developer. There's so much stuff to be done, you know, and I have so many senior developers that I know that are in my network that if they wanted to pursue the architect route, they could. But just like Peter read off of his Quora, think of all the duties that a senior consultant has, you know, and now put them in the context of they work where you work. Brian, and they're at a consulting company, and it's even tenfold, so I think it's still the same path. Junior developers want to march up the chain, and you want to be a senior developer, but at the same time now, you've also got DevOps, you've got all these agile methodologies, we've got UX prototyping, we've got just native cloud. So a senior developer doesn't necessarily have to be an app architect. You could lead from all kinds of different points in the building, because the SDLC, God, if you talk about anything that's changed in 15 years, it's that. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So
Definitely. And this is quite actually funny that, back when I started, seniors were, it was more just an increase in pay. The job didn't seem to entail anything different from that perspective. It was just, you were a senior now, but you did the same thing you did yesterday, the same thing you did the day before. Yeah. And my first time I butted heads with this traditional career path here was when you had the lead, technical lead, a team lead, and I was probably too young to understand what it entailed, and I found that all of my technical acumen, all of my time spent crunching through learning new stuff and so on was completely thrown out the window, because the duties that I suddenly had were completely unrelated to writing and reviewing code.
Yeah.
And that shocked me a little bit. And I had a really good talk to at that stage my mentor, and he said that he felt it was an area I lacked in my skill set. It was the lead developer type scenario, and he wanted to put me out there, tie an anchor around my feet and throw me in the deep end. Luckily for me, I could swim, or the water was really shallow, but it was a shock to me that many saw the same career path, but I saw there was far too large a gap between the skills you needed, especially from when you came to senior and you went to what people saw as the next one, which was the team lead,
right,
or the architect. I mean, the skills required to sit in those roles, especially when I worked in I won't name it, but a very large international consultancy. My duties were completely different. My skills that I had to skill up on were completely different to anything I spent the past 10 years doing. And suddenly I was in this role here, and I suddenly had to bring a different hat that I didn't know which way it was going to be turning.
Yeah.
And I think from that perspective, the traditional path, the career path in itself, yes, if it can be defined up front from you, then you can see it. I mean, I see a lot of senior developers that should never be team leads. That should never be lead developers.
Amen.
Yeah.
The skills that you're learning and stuff. I'm sorry to cut you off, Shawty. The skills that you're talking about that you had to grow, they're non-technical skills. It's different. And there's so many times that you look at sports, you look at technology, where the best player does not dictate being the best leader of men and women and everyone else.
No, definitely not.
Perfect example. During my time in the communications industry, as part of the job that I did as an engineer, my contract stipulated that a couple of times a month I had to floor walk in the company's contact center. Just, walking around, listening in on some of the calls, making sure that staff were kind of broadly getting things right. And if anybody appeared to be stuck, just giving them a little helping hand. And the thing that really, really, really opened my eyes walking around a customer contact center like that was just how many people get promoted up the food chain for nothing more than the fact that they know how to talk about a given subject. Not that they know about the subject or how the subject works, just the fact that they know the right things to say at the right time, in the right place, and they instantly become team leads because of this. And so many people just really should not be leaders, because they get into that position and a little bit of power goes to the head. And once the power starts going to the head, that's it. It's game over. And you can't dislodge them. I think it's a Scott Adams Dilbert thing. but you promote people to the level where they're just dangerous enough to blow the foot off, but not do any real damage.
Yeah.
But they're incapable of learning anything more. And that's as high as you take them within an organization, you know? And leadership just tends to be one of those things where people can continuously get higher and higher and higher and use bigger foot guns, basically.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's to me, like when I'm talking about the career path at Headstorm to candidates, you know, we have a fork in the road when you get to senior consultant, and that's project leader and that's architect, you know, and I tell these people, I say, it's not going to be so much, Peter, what you want to pursue. It's going to be what you're called to do. Like you're going to be in a room and you're going to be like, oh, I could fix that problem. Oh, I could help her out with this, you know, hey, you know what? I know where you're going through and I want to help you navigate that. And then all of a sudden it's like, you know, this was, you know, for me, especially when I got into leadership, it was getting that high about like helping the team out, you know, and it was feeling that, you know, man, you know what, this person really had a deer in headlights look, and now they're contributing.
There is a certain satisfaction to it, isn't there?
Yeah. And if you don't that's why you don't really pursue the leadership. It really kind of comes and grabs you if you're ready for it.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly what they always say, isn't it? A true leader leads from the back. They don't lead from the front.
Oh, that's very important with technology.
Sorry,
you know,
I got that the wrong way around.
Nothing against we've got leaders at our company that are great product people that have not written any code, but they're not afraid to do anybody's job, and they'll roll their sleeves up and help any way you can, whether it's day one or year 50.
Well, we have a TV program over here. Actually, I think it's an American export. I might be wrong, but it's like a boss of the company.
Undercover boss, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called. And what they do is they go and they disguise themselves and they spend a week or a month down on the shop floor. And I honestly think that more of these CEOs and CTOs and people like that should actually spend more time doing things like that.
Sure.
You know, it would open their eyes a lot, for sure. You know? Right, so...
Okay, let me change track again a little bit here. I want to talk a little bit about some, I call them myths in today's IT&T industry. And you guys may disagree or agree that's what this is for. But when you start out in the industry today, or even when you're placed in the industries, let's put it that, who's responsible for training and acquiring skills? So I see two parts to this here. The first one, of course, is that the company is responsible for training and for people to maintain their skills and acquiring skills in their workforce. Definitely, I agree with that statement 100%. But then I also have another hat that says, okay, who's responsible for me paying my mortgage? And I think this is, I say, it's an attitude type towards what you're doing. You know, if you're stuck in a job and you haven't gotten training in 5 years, you get angry and you want to leave, you would be so much worse off in the, let's say, in the job hunt, because you haven't really learned anything new in 5 years, for example. So I see people, you know, coming from school, and they are believing, and one of the typical question I have is, okay, what is your training budget? And I think this is a very arbitrary question, because the candidate possibly doesn't know what training cost. So I could say anything. I could say £5,000, and they'll go, wow, that sounds like a lot. Or they may say, oh my God, that's only 1 week's training a year in the classroom, for instance. But if you look at it from a new starter that comes in here, where do you see it, Will, from your side? Because you deal with so many more candidates than I do, is who do you believe is responsible for training and, you know, and upskilling and so on? Okay.
I'll do two parts. So number one, from the candidate's perspective, and really just kind of recap on what I said before. If you're a candidate and you're going out into the world, you need to understand that, like I said, there's a JavaScript component to this job now, everywhere you go. There's a REST API component. There's a cloud component. You're going to have to learn, object-oriented fundamental stuff. Okay. So across the stack, and I don't mean specific, I mean fundamental. Okay. You need to always be pursuing those fundamental skills. Now, when I get to a company and they're doing all kinds of Angular stuff, and all of a sudden they're going to pay for me to do some React. Okay, that's great. That's when it's on the company. All right. We're onboarding a new client. We're onboarding a new whatever, where you need to learn this specific expertise to do your job. The company needs to say, hey guys, we're going to be using it every day. Let's train you up in that. Okay. It's why, like at Headstorm, we don't train you in everything, but we're training the hell out of AWS and Azure. Like we're doing all kinds of certifications there. And honestly, I'll tell people, like, Brian, even if you stay with us for 4 years, you're going to be so much valuable if you go on to do something else. You know what I mean?
I actually, that begs the question then. As a company, Headstorm, as a company that hires developers for a specific project, Headstorm knows ahead of time what the requirements for that project are going to be, right?
No. Okay, so when I say hire for a certain specific skill set, we know that we live in the cloud. We know that, guess what, whatever you take, we're going to have an AWS or Azure. Okay, so if we can certify people in these fundamental technologies, then we know whatever project comes down the pipe, this is going to be utilized there. Okay, so we're not going to train in like a one-off something just for like one project. You know what I mean? Like go ahead.
The point I was actually trying to get, the point I was trying to get at actually was, if you know that you're going to use a specific set of skills for a given project, then why not? I'm playing devil's advocate here, by the way. Why not just go and hire the person that has those skills instead of hiring the person that doesn't have them skills, then training them?
Great question. Because regardless of that one project, there's going to be another project and another and another. So if I go out and I hire someone just because they know Vue and I don't pick up another Vue project, what do I do with my now niche Vue expert that only wants Vue? And that's why I hired them. That's why that doesn't work for us.
So what you're saying basically is you hire people to join Headstorm and stay with Headstorm. Yes,
absolutely. Oh, yeah. We spend so much money on people to make sure that, that they're ready for anything that comes down the pipe.
See, that's where it's very, very different in the freelance industry.
Oh, you don't have anybody that does that for you at all.
Well, it's not so much that. It's I take somebody on for a project. I can't guarantee that once that project finishes that I'm going to be able to keep them around. Now, it might be that I overlap a couple of projects, and because I'm using a similar technology, I can keep them on. But more often than not, once the project's over, that's it. I'm sorry, there's your cards. It's nothing personal, but I can only pay you if I'm getting paid to pay you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a good example would be this. Like, Shawty, if I said, I've got one contractor that's going to stay with you forever, all right, and they know C# and front-end JavaScript just exceptionally well, you're probably going to be able to deploy them a few different times versus they know this version of BizTalk to the T, and they can help you with this one high-paying niche contract. But after that, you're going to cut them loose,
I mean, what you tend to do in the freelance side of things, anyway, is you keep the contractor equivalent of your little black date book. Yeah. And I will hire people that I've hired before. When I get a job comes up, I have a defined list of people. I will go around and I will ask before I start reaching out to the recruiters and the people farmers and things like that. You know what I mean? Yep. Because I know and trust those people.
Yep.
I think so. If I circle back just to my opening statement is about responsibilities for training and acquiring skills, and Will, you presented very much a very valid long-term view from a corporate perspective, definitely, especially with consulting. If you look at it from a, let's call it an in-house software engineer that is been hired because, well, they happen to have the fundamental skills that are required. The company, for whatever reason, may not be fast moving. I mean, look at certain industries like finance. They're still seeing COBOL and DB2 solutions.
Yep.
That still require people of Peter's age.
Careful.
But you see, I mean, the way I view the responsibility here is twofold. You know, I can send people on a course, but if they have no interest in it, they're not going to learn anything. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I think the responsibility sits first and foremost with the employee. Whether or not it's their work in IT&T or their work in software engineering, they're there. And I think their value to the company increases as they learn.
Yeah.
A company is not going to go out and train you so you can leave them. That's a given.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there is the typical moniker now. What if we don't train them and they stay? You know, that's also a dangerous part.
Yeah.
And I think that has gone around many, many times about who is responsible for not. I think it's the initiative should come from, I think, in my opinion, it should come from the developers. It should come from the team leads, the technical leads, and the architects, because they're the ones that are building the solution up. It shouldn't be HR saying we have a training budget this year and everybody needs to learn Outlook. That should not be the training that is focused on the developers themselves. So you need to have a strong, engaged leadership, I think, that can specify and strategize this path that you people on. Because Will, you said, you're right, it's expensive to hire. It is very expensive, both in man hours and in dollars.
Well, one thing I always tell beginner programmers when they turn around and say to me, what should I learn first? Give me a 10-step training plan. What do I need to learn in what order? And the first thing I'll say when I see that question is anything and nothing. And then they'll kind of look at me and go, well, what do you mean anything and nothing? And say, well, the first thing you need to learn to do is to play. It's as simple as that. Just sit down at a computer, jump on the web, look at something that interests you. If it tickles your fancy, download it. Have a muck around with it. Oh, but what if I get it wrong? What if I break it? What if I don't understand it? So what? You know? If you don't understand it, you break it, chuck it out. Go and download something else. Do something else. You know? And just play. Just be a digital explorer.
Yeah. Curiosity. There was I saw a hiring ad for a consultancy in Sweden that is in Europe. And the first question was, what does it take to be a developer? And this lady that was presented, she was spot on. She said, curiosity.
100%. No, 1,000%.
Yeah. And as I thought, that's so simple, isn't it? Curiosity. And it is true.
Well, that can die too. Like, I mean, so I've been involved with LiDNUG for a long time, and I've got a great .NET network, you know, and it's really changed, you know, and because of me being involved with Microsoft for so long, a lot of these candidates are friends of mine now, right? And I'll tell you guys this, I got a good friend that's up Schitt's Creek because was at the same big legacy company for 11 years. And he's that guy that's got every version of Windows on his resume. You know, every version of operating system since Solaris. He's got VC++, Visual, like in his resume, you know? And I'm trying to help him right now. And he's like, you know, I've got to have this much money because that's my lifestyle. And I've got to have this and this. And it's to the point where he's getting angry. And I'm trying to counsel him. And I'm like, man, like I can't apologize for some of these major paradigms of technology that have snuck up on you. Okay. The internet kind of maybe snuck up on you. Like, I'm sorry about that, you know, but he was head down. He didn't spend any money out of pocket. He never left anywhere because it was a security thing. He never went to new teams because, well, I've got this expertise that I know right now, and that's what I get paid for, you know, and he's in trouble right now. You know, so when we talk about the responsibility, you know, the corporation needs to buy into you because that's their job. But at the same time, like, you've got to get your head up the keyboard once in a while, and you got to look around and be like, am I doing right now what I'm doing? Is it going to be applicable? I mean, shit, 3 years down the road? You know, someone asked a question about Xamarin. Xamarin was hot 4 years ago. Like we're just like not doing as much in Xamarin, like it ebbs and flows, you know. So Silverlight went and left, you know. So it's just tough, you know. It's I don't, you know, it's a tough life that y'all lead. My heart bleeds for people that get left behind, even though they're good people and they just didn't really see the forest of the trees as things have changed.
Of course, the thing is as well, though, the dragons beware part of the training story is the shysters that are out there as well.
Oh, sure.
They're particularly with COVID. There's been a lot of small fly-by-night companies that have set themselves up as training. You know, every bugger's on the bandwagon now. There's training blogs, training sites, training video sites, and they're all trying to get a slice of the subscription pie. And there's so many of them that really shouldn't be teaching people because all they are doing is spinning off bad practices. You know, they're not giving quality. They're not giving a quality education, but what they are very, very, very good at doing, and sometimes too slick at doing, is providing good marketing experience. And then people buy in, and because of once they've bought in, they feel that they've got to complete the training, even if the training is substandard, and they're no better off after having spent the money. You know?
And funny enough, talking about training and so on, and this is something that I see many companies fail at, and that is learning management. And
yes,
most people think it means setting a budget and setting a percentage of your time, or when you are in between projects, or when you're not actively working, you can learn and so on. And what I have found with learning management is that unless it's planned, you may very well fall into these, as you said, the shyster subscription training that shouldn't be teaching you things. But also, I think when you start wasting time, pardon my expression here now, on trying to learn something ad hoc, I think you're spinning your wheels. You may have 1,000 horsepower, but you have no road grip. Simply as that.
Yeah.
And learning
Absolutely.
management, I feel, is like key to anything we do in our industry as a whole, whether or not it is from Will's perspective, or it is learn from the freelancer, or from my perspective. I think you're spinning if it's not managed, if it's not set down and it's not taught, I think you are ending up wasting time. And wasted time, we know here, you know, technology waits for nobody.
Absolutely.
If I want to spend 6 months learning something new, well, in 6 months' time, have I really set out to learn what I set out to learn? If you can't measure it, it's not a goal. I mean, isn't that what the majority of development methodologies and project management methodologies go by? It needs to be measurable for it to be something you can reach. And I think with learning management, it has to be the same thing. It has to.
Yeah, it's a really good, you know, piece of advice that I give to candidates is when you're interviewing for the job that you're interviewing for, ask about what your job looks like 3 years down the road. You know, if they're like, oh, well, if you do well at this stage, then we have this stage. And then if you do well here, you've got a choice to go here or there. You know, like, make sure there's a roadmap there. And you know what? You're going to get that from technical companies where software is their product that really understand technology, consulting companies, of course, you know, because, you know, these kids that I talked to out of college, I'm like, the name of the game is for this learning to not come out of your own pocket. You've been spending enough on education. You know what I mean?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's very costly to go out and spend, you know, money on courses and so on. But let's face it, we have this thing that got invented in a little bit while back called the internet. And you can find a lot of information there. That's a huge amount of information that is freely available to you. And you can open up the browser and you can search for things and so on. And those are fantastic sources just to get started. There even is, some of the some of the larger subscription-based services that has mobile apps that you can watch.
Oh yeah.
Commuting and you can watch in your lunch break while you're eating your sandwich that you didn't really care for, but you need a bit of energy to keep going.
Imagine if you had Pluralsight when you and Peter were in your early 20s.
Even now,
didn't have the internet in the early 20s. What are you talking about? But yeah, you're right.
Even now, 40 years down the line, when I'm sitting having my lunch, I'm sitting here at this very desk, and I'll have a YouTube video on. You know,
I think it's for us in particular, I think in the consulting industry, it's important that we learn a lot of things. But we can't really go down to our bosses and say, listen, here, I need 6 weeks off because I need to learn a new JavaScript framework, or I need to learn how to use Kubernetes suddenly. It doesn't go like that in a very is he escaping? It doesn't work like that. And we measure what we're learning. So for each level of learning something, there is some criteria for when you can say, okay, if I spend this much time, I should achieve to learn this about this technology. The next step from there is here, and you can then ascertain how much time do I need to spend to learn it. Do I really need to learn end-to-end delivery on, let's say, Vue? Do I need to do that? What about React? Do I need to know end-to-end absolutely everything about it to be able to do it? Probably not. I can probably start with, level 1, let's call it like that, which is knowledge about what the platform is for, what it's used for, its pros and cons, and more importantly, what you shouldn't use it for. Well, the next step is to be able to deliver, sorry, Peter, to be able to deliver core components of it. Not all of it, because, look at the .NET framework. Right. It's so massive.
The basics, yeah.
Yeah. And then at the end, in the level 3, you can do end-to-end on some of it. You may not have touched the entire framework in here, but you can bite it into chunks that is actually manageable and it's measurable.
Yep.
And then you can invest your time and corporate money into it.
Yep.
Well, the approach I generally tend to take is when I spec for a job, I generally, after the first 1 or 2 meetings, I already have a good idea in my head as to how I'm going to approach the problem solution. So what I will then do is I'll go out and I'll do what I call shallow reading on the subjects. It's kind of like the same as skimming a book, if that makes sense. And I don't deep dive into it. I read enough to be able to reasonably answer questions. Yeah. So that the 3rd or the 4th meeting, I can start putting a picture together with my client and saying, well, I think we need to be doing this. I think we need to be doing that. This technology seems as though it's going to be the right fit. But I never, ever, ever sort of say this is definitely going to be the right fit. That comes a lot further down the line. And then what I do is I do this with a couple of different sort of technologies. So I'll pick sort of 3 or 4 different technologies that are a good fit for the project. And then further down the line, once we've actually chosen a technology and at the point that is appropriate for that bit of information that needs to be studied, I'll then deep dive. And I'll deep dive only that small specific segment, enough to do that part of the job. Then I'll come back up to the surface for air. Then I'll move on to the next shallow topic and I'll deep dive only the specific bits I need for that, So as a freelancer, what you might find is that, yes, you will gain experience in working with a particular technology, but it might take you 3, 4, 5 projects before you have that bit of the technology and that bit of the technology and that bit of the technology. Yeah. Whereas I think with what you're saying with the enterprise sort of view is that what you need to do is you need to manage all them bits together. So let's say that a particular stack takes 6 discrete chunks of knowledge, environmental knowledge on that subject. I think what you're actually saying is the enterprise would prefer to manage it so that you do chunk 1, then chunk 2, then chunk 3, then chunk 4, and then be able to say, I can do all 6 chunks.
Yeah.
You know, whereas
it's I think it's a way of managing both your let's say your time, because let's face it, when you are working in an enterprise, for instance, you end up, when you learn on the job, so to speak, you also are commissioned. So that's also, it's a cost that also has to be factored in, you know, to what it is. I'm not saying that you get paid per line of code you do, but you are not there to produce what the team or the project maybe require you to do in that sense.
Yeah.
So it's very important that you structure your learning in, as I said, in those chunks. And the thing is, the chunks can roll up to the next level together. So if you learn level 1, there might be 5 level 1s within a certain framework. And once you have learned, let's say, the foundation of 3 of those, they may actually make up 1 block of level 2. And 2 or 3 level 2s may run up on level 3. So you break it down and you look at, before you start learning anything, you start looking at, okay, what does this consist of? If I had to start all over learning .NET now, I would need to know all the components of it first. What does it consist of? Just what can it be used for? What is the platforms you have? Of course, .NET is massive nowadays. And I think very few .NET developers, even with 10 years plus experience, can say they have touched every aspect of it.
Oh,
which
absolutely.
definitely is, yeah. And if you went down and you learn something of that magnitude, learning anything, you imagine if you're looking at, okay, predefined services like Azure, for instance. Now, if Azure was static and didn't grow and didn't change, that would be a lot easier because everything is really neatly defined. In a learning management environment, you identify these chunks in the frameworks. And you, of course, see, okay, we know that we have to look at security. Well, here's part of chunk 1 of security for this. Then there is part 2 and part 3 until we can logically put them together. Because let's face it, setting somebody on a 5-day course doesn't make them an expert in anything today. It's 5 days of PowerPoint and a reference manual this thick, and this cost you $5,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's giving you a lot of level 1s.
Well, over here in the UK, we're actually quite spoiled with some of the things that we get. There is, in the subject of training, it is really, really advantageous to be in full-time employment over here in the UK. Because if you've got a company here that does want to invest in training, what the government will actually do is they will pay that company a subsidiary to go and train that person.
It happens in many companies, in many countries, where you can both either, it's a tax benefit to use training, just as marketing and business development can be deducted in your taxes and so on, and investment into things. Training is. But it's, even if you go and look at, if I let's say you and I were working on a project that had a deadline for May, and you had to then learn technology. I couldn't count you as a FTE for all of May because you had to learn chunks in here.
No, exactly.
Now, if the project required 2 FTEs from now to May, obviously suddenly now that there is an imbalance of resources to put on this project, and I would need a third one in to assist where you weren't there and take over where you weren't there. And we all know that just because you throw, 9 women at a pregnancy doesn't mean you can give birth in a month. You know what I mean? So it becomes a cost is not just financial, it's also effort, time, risk of other things and so on that really has to be calculated together. It's simplistic to say 5 days off you go, that's it.
Well, Mr. Lanata's got his hand up again there.
Yeah, another question coming there from a sit for Will. To round up, what would you look for in a candidate, and what are the red flags?
What would I look for in a candidate? I
That's
would
a
say
whole session in itself, isn't it?
I know. I'll give my synopsis, all right, and I'll get kind of like personal into like what I look for a pretty damn good consulting company. Number one, I think CS degrees and masters and all that, they're wonderful, but that's all just a leading indicator. You know, we hire engineers of all ilk. Okay, so I look for engineers that want to solve problems. That's my number one thing. I want to wake up every day and solve problems. That's what consulting's all about. So whether that's a CS degree, code camp, whether it's chemical engineering, I hired a girl that was an astrophysicist that writes the most beautiful Scala code you've ever seen. Engineering, solving problems, okay, and pursuing that. If you can't get a CS degree, go to a code camp. If you can't do that, go out there and build some shit on your own and put it on your GitHub repository and put it all over LinkedIn. Okay, so that builder mentality. I would say number two, I definitely look for some sort of business and client skills. Okay, and that's away from technology. That's not just I know how to write and read proper code. That's I know how to ask questions. I know how to, you know, maybe talk to that boss that is giving me some unexpected deadlines, you know, some unrational objections. All the code that's really written right now when you're just starting out is usually written on a team, unless you get to the level of being a Peter and being your own independent hired gun, but that takes years to get to that. And really, as far as like just I guess you could say just core, I'm always gonna want to know, how are you building your front end? What languages do you know in the middle? What do you know in the back? And what do you know about the cloud? So it's not just, you know, the specific frameworks and languages I look for. I just want to know from a tier perspective, what is the stuff that you're using? What's your experience and what's your passion on the different tiers? That's really about it.
I don't do anywhere near as much recruiting as you or Brian do. But if there's one thing that I always look for, first and foremost, for me, it's passion. If you can sit in that room in front of me and you can tell me about your favorite project or the project that you did your best work on, and if you can make me buy into that same project, then you've got me on your side. You haven't necessarily got the job, but you've definitely got me on your side. Because the one thing I will always say when it comes to, well, how do you to the question that says, how do you test your clients? The one thing I will always say is, I'm not testing you, because if I had any doubt whatsoever about your technical ability, you wouldn't be sat in this room right now.
Sure.
It's as
and
simple
really
as that.
To give some better strategy to that question, because I know I gave kind of a like, show your passion answer. And it's like, well, Will, how do I represent that? This is how you represent it, okay? Your LinkedIn is your storefront, okay? Your LinkedIn, if you do it right, your LinkedIn is that first round interview, okay? So if I go to your about section and you started off in finance or insurance and you realized that was a shitty life and you didn't like it, and then some friend taught you SQL at work, and you went to a code academy and you fell in love with Python, and you know that you want your life to be a developer right now, then I need to see that. I need to hear that, and I need to feel it, okay? So you're looking at that LinkedIn,
Sure.
you want to talk about that, okay? It's got to be there. I don't care if it was a non-traditional path, but this is why I want to be a developer. This is why I'm already a developer, and this is what I know now, and this is my path. This is where I'm going. Okay, you want to list your marketable technologies. You got some JavaScript skills, list them.
This, I think, as well.
What?
This, I think, as well, is also one of the ways that you can filter out the good recruiters from the bad recruiters. Because speaking, I'm going to flip the cards now. Instead of being the person doing the interviewing, being the interviewee, you should almost definitely, as an interviewee, be asking as many questions of the recruiter as the recruiter is asking.
For sure. Dude, the marketplace demands it. A good coder can work where they want.
You should be asking about the company's culture. You should be asking about the company's management structure, you know, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Meet the team. You know, if you have interest in the job and you're interested in the company, you would naturally ask questions, and you should. And it also conveys.
Right.
I want somebody working with me that want to work with me.
Yeah.
That gives a better feeling, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think Gavin has another question.
No, just
before
about
we
onto
close
what
off.
you were just saying there. From Steve to Shawty, the concept of play is spot on. Learn something new by overlapping it with the subject matter you love. And also again from Steve, adding to Will's comments, when I mentor juniors, I remind them that this is a career that you are always in school. Things change quickly, sometimes widely.
For sure.
Stay ahead of the wave, keep learning.
Yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Absolutely.
Just going back briefly to the subject of play. Another thing that is a really, really good thing to get your head into the game if you're thinking of taking up development as a career, and that's to look at your life, look at the things that you do in your life. I'll give you a perfect example. When I first met my now wife, she was very, very technology illiterate. She didn't even have a mobile phone. I mean, it was always an analog phone. She'd never had a computer. She'd never really used a computer. And she struggled to use the browser, to just simple things like finding out how to search for things. So what I did was I made this internal site that I called the intranet, because I've always had my own home network, and I made this intranet application. And the idea was I was building this application purely to help her. It had shortcuts and things on that she could change and jump to her favorite sites very quickly as she learned things. But more importantly to me, that application was also used for me to experiment with MVC when that came out. Well, initially it started out as web forms, So it started out as web forms, and then it became MVC, then it became Angular with a web API backend, and it's still around. I still have this application. My wife doesn't use it anymore because she's much more literate with technology now, but it's still around. It's still my proving ground. And now it's all been rewritten for like the 20 millionth time in Blazor. So find something in your life that is useful. Might just be keeping track of your daily expenses, might be something as simple as taking an energy reading and keeping an eye on your bills, but make it something useful. Make it something that you personally are going to get value from and get invested in.
Yeah.
On quick on that note, using in your life, I had an acquaintance of mine that he was a real estate agent, and he loved playing golf, but he hated being a real estate agent. And he liked technology. I mean, he had always had the latest gadget with golfing, always. And he decided to become a developer, and he wrote his own mobile phone application to keep track of his golf scores. That was just his first thing. And of course, it grew from there. And he does work as a developer today. But you're right. Finding something that you're passionate about and blending it a little bit is probably the best way, because you have your own curiosity, you have your own passion, and it's easier to learn something new if you're going to have fun doing it.
Because far too many of them think that they've got to build a Facebook or a Twitter or something like that, because these are the things they see every day, and they think that that's what software development's about. It's about learning to build something like that, something like that, make money from building something like that. And some of the best ideas, some of the things that have made people the most money over the years have been born out of idle curiosity. They've been born out of somebody sitting there going, gee, I wish I had a piece of software that did that for me.
Yeah, that's how we got every collaboration tool on the market. That's how Slack came about. I mean, that's how all of that came about. We have a good consulting company. If you're not using the technology because you're getting paid for it and utilized there billable wise, then you're spinning up your own internal projects using that technology. That's how we got into Vue.
Exactly. I think we gone over time.
Well, we're at 1 3/4 hours at the moment.
Nice.
So I'll tell you what. Let's just put the call out one last time. Are there any quick questions left that anybody wants to ask, not specific to where we are in the discussion at the moment? Let's have a look. Yes, no?
Just while we're waiting for questions to come in there, I just wanted to add just what we're talking about, just playing there. One of the things I love doing is I write software for streamers. It's mostly aimed at entertainment sort of things, and it's silly bits of code. But it's code that they struggle to write themselves. It's not their thing. But no, I get a lot of enjoyment out of that. Also, I get to see the results live as well very quickly. It's not something that I might not see because they take the code away and just hide it in some cupboard somewhere. They never use it anymore. It's something they actively use every day, and I can see it. And it's not only that; it's code that allows viewers to interact with those streamers in some way.
That's
again,
cool.
It's very entertainment, and there's a very good feedback. But yeah, like you said, playing with the technology just for the sake of it, just for the fun of it, it's very rewarding personally.
It is. Well, I mean, a lot of people don't know this about me, but my actual background, my actual educational background in the IT arena is not actually in software. My actual educational background, as far as my qualifications go, is digital electronics, CPU design, industrial robotics, that kind of thing. And the real reason I did so much with software as I did is because back in my early years, I was fascinated by the computer demo scene. And I started out writing computer demos, trainers, crack throws, things like that, you know. And my name actually appears in a lot of these technology demos, a lot more technology demos than you might actually realize, but you wouldn't know because it's always been handles and obfuscations, you know, and things like that.
I was going to say, how do you demonstrate a sundial?
You know, I did it because it was fun. It was about exploring the technology. It was about pushing the technology envelope. And I actually think in a lot of ways, Windows has destroyed that, because back then you had different hardware. You had to learn how to hit the hardware. You had to learn how to make something do something, you know? Whereas now it's just like, oh, there's an API for that.
Yep.
You know, there's a driver for that. There's an API for that. You know, just call a C# function and boom, Bob's your uncle.
Well,
you know,
there's no extra questions coming. So if we want to wrap things up there, I believe that is a good
yeah,
point to do it.
I'm happy to wrap there.
All right, gentlemen. Yeah, I got a hard stop at 4, so.
So I think we should probably do this again, actually, because I can think of lots more stuff that we haven't.
Yeah, me too.
You know, so let's hear your comments in LiDNUG.
Let's get a question bank, and we can do it a little bit more specific and formalized, and just knock them out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can make this a regular thing, because we've only just scratched the surface.
For sure.
At the moment. You know.
All right, gentlemen. All right, LiDNUG crew. Love you guys.
Thank you for your time, guys.
Yeah. Watching. Thank you very much. Take care all. Good night.
Good night.